NC State finished last season 6-7 overall after the disappointing loss to East Carolina in the Military Bowl. And I know for a lot of NC State fans right now, there doesn't seem to be a ton of optimism about around the football program. NC State, I think the over/under win total is 6.5 again for this upcoming season. Doesn't suggest a lot of expectation for State to have a bounce back year. But look, we're talking about Dave Doeren at NC State, and we know one thing Dave has proven time and time again here: the few times that he struggled or had a perceived to be down year, State's bounced right back. And I think there are many reasons to be optimistic about this team going into the 2025 season. But today, I'm going to give you three reasons why I believe NC State fans should be optimistic about this football team heading into the year. And first, let's start with the easy one. It's the offensive weapons for NC State. When you look at what NC State's returning on the offensive side of the ball, there is a lot to like about their offense. You've got quarterback CJ Bailey, who, for me, I think he's the biggest X factor with this team, and he gives them so much upside. We're talking about a guy who, this time a year ago, last July, he was expected to be redshirted behind Grayson McCall. He was not expected to play. He was not receiving the types of reps you want to give your starter. And then 3 games into the season, an injury to McCall, and you have CJ Bailey essentially taking over for the rest of the year. And he ended up playing or making 10 starts last season and had a ton of growth. And there were ups and there were downs. And the crazy thing about it is, I think if you look at his season and you take away the fact that he was a freshman and you just evaluate the tape, you would say there were a lot of areas that CJ could improve. But still, he finished the year with 22 total touchdowns and 10 interceptions. Those are good numbers for a true freshman. And if you looked across college football, he was up there with all of the top true freshmen in terms of performance and play. And so now with him, the unquestioned leader going into the offseason, NC State did not bring in a quarterback out of the transfer portal. He was able to go through the spring as the guy. He's going to go through summer workouts as the guy. He's going to go into the fall as the guy, and building a rapport with his skill position players. The expectation I have for CJ is he's going to have a big year, and he is in a position to take a major step in year two. So that's one reason to be optimistic for sure, is the fact that your quarterback, he is going to be up there with, I think, the top quarterbacks in the ACC based on what he did last year and his development. But then you look at the skill position players around him, right? Justin Jolie at tight end. He's being listed by some as a preseason All-American, certainly a preseason All-ACC selection, first, second team, whatever you want to put him on. You've got Hollywood Smothers at running back. I think he is a guy who's underrated right now. I mean, he's third or fourth team preseason All-ACC, depending on the publication. But there's upside for him in a feature role to be so productive this year. And so you've got Hollywood Smothers returning, who you go and look at NC State last year down to final 5-6 games of the year. He was winning games for NC State. He was putting State in a position to win games, and big play potential. I think he's a guy who the arrow's only pointing up for. Go to the wide receiver position. Anyone who follows InsidePackSports.com, you all know I am as big a Noah Rogers fan as you're going to find. And I think with the attrition NC State's had at the wide receiver position, I personally view it addition by subtraction. That's not a knock on Kevin Concepcion. That's not a knock on Dakari Collins, two guys who transferred out of the program. But I think less is more at the wide receiver position for NC State. I think the less miles to feed, you're going to get more efficient production, because now guys are going to stay on the court, on the field longer. And a player who I think is going to benefit from that, Noah Rogers. You've also got Wesley Grimes. You've got Terrell Anderson, Keenan Jackson, 4 guys who I think at that wide receiver position have a ton of potential to go out and make big plays. So when you look at CJ Bailey and the skill position talent, I think NC State's offense is in a position to where they can really lead this team for the first time in a long time. And that's a reason to be optimistic if you're an NC State fan, because I think now in college football, you have to be able to score points. We've seen State over the years be really good defensively, and there will be games where they just don't have a chance because they can't put up enough points because the other team's offense is just too good. And especially when you get into those games against the better competition, it's hard. You're going to be hard pressed to find a top 10, top 15 team that's not very good offensively. And so for NC State, you have to match that. And like I said, when you look at their skill position players, big time reason for NC State fans to be optimistic. Number two, I think there's potential on the defensive side. I was actually surprised by this when we've seen the some of these early preseason All ACC teams be released. In all honesty, I did not expect to see any NC State players on those lists going into the year. That's not a knock on them. I just thought other programs had maybe addressed bigger needs in the transfer portal. Maybe they were returning more proven players. But when you look at NC State, Sean Brown, he's been listed first team, second team All ACC linebacker by multiple publications going into the year. And Sean had a really good year last year in his first year at linebacker. Can he take another step in DJ Elliott's scheme, but also in year two at a linebacker for Sean? I mean, he has the chance to be that week in, week out playmaker we know State's had over the years, whether it's been Drake Thomas or Peyton Wilson at that linebacker position. Brandon Cleveland at nose, another guy who's receiving all ACC preseason accolades for NC State. He's now been a 2-year starter. He's played a ton of snaps for NC State. I think he's a guy, if he had went into the transfer portal, he would have been really, really coveted. He chose to remain, and I think he can be a key cog for State's defense as well. And then you look at some of the other additions I think they've made out of the transfer portal. Keon Sloan at edge, Trey Thomas at edge, two guys who can get after the quarterback. I like Jermaine John or JJ Johnson, who State brought in out of Georgia State in the secondary. Jamel Johnson from Temple, two players who I think were proven at their previous stops, all conference players at their previous stops. You brought in Nelson from I think it was North Texas, who was another guy who was all conference. So you've added to the secondary, you've added all conference performers that were out of the ACC coming in. And we know at State, you've seen guys make that transition and perform well. I go back to Robert Kennedy, who was an all conference performer at Old Dominion, came to NC State, played the nickel position, and he fit right away. He was plug and play right away for NC State, and State didn't miss a beat adding him. And I think if you get that production at the secondary, from those additions, and you see what you have in Sean Brown, you get Caden Fordham back, you know you've got Brandon Cleveland, you add those two transfer pieces at edge, there's some potential there defensively that I don't think the slide necessarily has to be what a lot of people may be projecting for NC State when you look at this defense and you lose a Tony Gibson as defensive coordinator and you lose, Brandon Cisse and Aiden White and Davin Van and Bishop Fitzgerald, different guys who've played major roles. I think State's went out and they've taken this approach defensively to where they brought back some proven guys, but they've thrown darts at defensive line, linebacker, and the secondary and the transfer portal. They've just brought in a bunch of numbers, and the hope is you're going to have a couple guys pop. And so do I think NC State's going to be this shutdown defense that they've been a lot of times here under Tony Gibson? Probably not. But I still think the potential is there for them to be really good and to be solid when pairing it with what I've already addressed, a strong offense. And so those are two reasons, offensively and defensively. And the third, and I think oftentimes for a lot of people, a lot of teams, this ends up being the biggest one you need to look at, and that's the schedule. How does your schedule set up? And for NC State, what I like most about it is, at least in my opinion, it's front loaded. And what I mean by front loaded is State has plenty of opportunities to get off to a fast start when you look at this schedule. In the first 6 games of the year, 4 of those games are at home, and the other 2 are at Wake Forest and at Duke. So when you start the season in August and you get all the way to mid-October, you will not have left the state of North Carolina if you're NC State. You would have played 4 games at home, 2 games, the 2 games on the road. One will be at Wake and Winston-Salem. One will be at Duke and Durham. So you've got 6 games to start the year. None of those opponents, in my opinion, project to be ranked. So you're playing 6 games, advantageous locations, and against unranked opponents. That should give NC State every opportunity to start the season fast. And I'm a big believer in momentum. I think for a lot of teams, one of your goals should really be getting to November with something to play for. And what I mean by that is, like, you want to get into those final 3-4 games of the season with optimism and a total buy-in from your team. Go look at how seasons progress for certain teams. If you struggle early on and it snowballs against you, look, we know what's happening now. Some players start to opt out because of transfer rules. Some guys just tend to quit on the team. You've got just a negative snowball that you don't really want to have going in that direction. Whereas you look at the programs that exceed expectations, more often than not, it's because they start the season fast and they get that snowball rolling in the right way. I look at Syracuse last year. Syracuse is a team that came out of nowhere to go 9-3. And how did they do it? Because they started the year fast. And I think they kind of build on that positive momentum and they continue to have something to play for every single week. And I think if you're NC State, that front loaded schedule should give them an opportunity to get in that spot. Another reason with the schedule, they don't face Clemson this year. They don't face SMU this year, the two teams who made the ACC title game last season. They don't face Louisville, another team expected to be really strong, made the ACC title game 2 years ago. Those three teams are off the schedule for NC State. So I think from an ACC perspective, that right there gives you a good start. You do play Florida State, who knows where they're going to be at, but you get them at home, and you play Miami. And so that's the other thing I want to talk about is the final 4 games of the season. So I said earlier, you want to get to November, right? You want to get to November with something meaningful to play for. Well, if you're NC State and you can do that, well, with that November stretch, it is Georgia Tech at home, at Miami, Florida State at home, and North Carolina at home. Look, 4 quality opponents, 4 ACC teams, but 3 of those 4 games are at home, and the 1 game at Miami, who knows with Miami? I know there are always high expectations for Miami going into the season, but for me at least, Miami tends to be that poster child of how's the season going and how are they playing by the time they get to the end of the year? Because oftentimes for them, it doesn't seem like it's been going well at the end of the year. And so if you can get to November with something to play for and you got 3 out of 4 at home, I think NC State's going to be in a position to exceed expectations this year. So I really like the schedule from NC State. It's not easy. I didn't even mention the road game at Notre Dame. You have a game against Pittsburgh on the road mixed in there as well. It won't be easy, but if they can navigate it, stay healthy, and build some positive momentum early in the year, it's going to put them in a position, I think, to pick up some wins down the stretch that maybe right now people wouldn't be projecting NC State to win. So, look, I think for NC State under Dave Doeren, we know last year was not an ideal season. I also think if you would ask that coaching staff, they would have told you, hey, we went into the year not expecting to play a true freshman, a quarterback, and have him make 10 starts either. So I think that kind of went into them finishing 6 and 7 just as much as anything else. But we know they've been able to bounce back under Doeren. And I'm not putting it past them to do it again this year. I think NC State fans should be optimistic, and you're going to see that optimism grow as we get closer to the start of the season. But today I wanted to give you guys 3 reasons why NC State fans should be optimistic about this team heading into the 2025 season. Hope you all enjoyed it. And before we get going, also, like I do always on here, I want to remind you all, if you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to the channel at Inside Pack Sports here on YouTube. And also check out our website, www.insidepacksports.com, for the latest information on NC State athletics.